I now call on Deputy Shane Ross.
Thank you, Nicola, and I'd like to also congratulate the three proposers for bringing forward this motion. You know, it just occurred to me that the culture of corruption is so deeply embedded in this country that you could contrast it with other countries which take more extreme measures against corruption. I suspect if some of the offences which we're talking about were committed in China, the offenders would be shot or beheaded or whatever they do in China for people who commit offences of this sort. In Ireland, many of them are greeted as heroes. And, you know, I thought it was the real problem we have is not just the offenders themselves, it's ourselves as a people. It's our attitude to corruption. I was at a dinner some years ago, it was in London, it was overseas, but the guest speaker was Garret Fitzgerald, the former Taoiseach. And afterwards he was asked questions, and particularly about the corruption which was obviously rampant in Ireland at the time and which had reached England. And a rather stuffy Tory at the back of the room put up his hand and said, "How do you tolerate all the corruption of people who are in your own party and in opposite parties?" And he said, the problem is not with the public representatives or the politicians. The problem is with the electorate. And, you know, the capacity that we have as a people for constantly re-electing people who are associated and indeed guilty with corruption is something we are going to have to face ourselves. It is all very well and quite right that we should condemn what has happened. But the old maxim, and they used to say it about a former Taoiseach, Mr. Haughey here, that he may be a crook, but he gets things done. In other words, it doesn't really matter, as long as he does things which do matter on the other side. And our tolerance for corruption is something which we absolutely and totally refuse to face here in this country, and it's something we're going to have to do. You know, it's okay to condemn those who do it. It's okay to try and set up agencies, but we've also got to stop tolerating politicians and others who are obviously corrupt, proven in some cases, proven as corrupt. And you know, we do have a responsibility in this House for that. And I think the way that we have disposed of it in the past is completely and utterly inadequate and very cowardly. The solution, which is not inevitable, but which occurs on nearly every occasion where a massive scandal erupts, is to set up a tribunal. Tribunals are proven as vehicles for escape for corrupt people. They delay the whole situation so far and kick it down the road so far that nothing ever really comes of them. They do expose certain things from time to time, certain activities, certain corrupt activities, but nobody ever pays a price. They actually guarantee impunity. They underline impunity. They guarantee freedom for those who committed corruption. So I don't think we can say that any bill that we're going to introduce next week, and we'll see the terms of it, I doubt if that's going to tackle the serious underlying problem, which is not always what we saw on prime time the other night, awful as it was, but it's in ourselves. And I would think it very doubtful that those who are committing the sort of crimes we saw will ever see the inside of a court. And I'd just like to say one other thing. Have I got a minute left?
No, I'm afraid not.
Okay, I won't say
two further
else.
speakers.
I'll hand over to
thank
John
you.
Halligan.
I'd like to now call on Deputy John Halligan, and you're sharing the time remaining with Deputy Tom Fleming. And as you can see, there's just a little over 7 minutes remaining.
It's interesting in the document that was produced by Deputy Murphy and the others that they mentioned the word a threat to democracy. And I heard somebody in the bar saying last night, gee whiz, that's a bit tough, that's a bit rough. But you have to ask yourself, is it really? And if we look at what are threats to democracy, what we could say war, armed revolt, you might say that severe apathy to the political system. But a threat to democracy that really, if you like, goes under and is not thought of too much is corruption. And if you look at the history of some countries around the world, that it hasn't been war and it hasn't been armed revolt. It's been corruption that has damaged the political process in many of these countries. And you know that I remember a friend of mine, and Deputy Ross was speaking earlier on about all of what happened here in Ireland, city managers, politicians, planning officers and so on. And there was a friend of mine in France, a businessman in France, and I don't know the name of the magazine, but he was telling me he was in this is during all of this, the Mann Tribunal and the Moriarty Tribunal and all that was breaking. And there was a business magazine he picked up in the hotel. And it was sad, really, because on it was Irlande, the Banana Republic. And that's exactly what we were taught of. Here's a relatively small country, a relatively small parliament, small population, and all that's gone on in this country. And the point remains that it will continue to go on. It was felt that after the Moriarty Tribunal and the Mann Tribunal, which, by the way, the government done nothing to act on. You may as well have not had the tribunals in the first place, because you didn't act on the recommendations of the tribunal, that people would have copped on. And then we look at what happened on the television last night. We look at these councillors and the arrogance of them to think that, well, look, I'm Fine Gael or I'm Fianna Fáil or I'm ex-Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil. I can get away with this because this is exactly what happened over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And if we were to go back into the 50s, the 60s, the 50s, we don't know what we dig up and find out. And I think it's rather shameful that we appear to have learned nothing. And to give an excuse, I think Deputy Coppin was saying that I have this form and I didn't know what to put on it. I have people come into my office with a housing form, which is about 20 pages. I think it's 22, is it? Yeah. A medical card form, where I'd find it difficult to fill out. Or a form for an old age pension. And these arrogant assholes come along and say, oh, didn't know about the form, couldn't, apologise. I didn't know what it meant. And we believe that. We're actually believing this. We're believing this again. Yeah. And this is exactly, and I mean, you fill the form out wrong. Some poor old age pensioner, it's sent back, you don't get your medical card, you don't get your pension. And we have tolerated people saying, as a last resort, I really didn't know what I was filling out or what I should have filled out. Is this what we've come to in this country? Is this what we have come to? Where we now allow, we can subvent politics, some people, and subvert politicians. And that's exactly what's happening. And none of us are shocked that this continues to go on. And why do we need an agency? If ever we needed an agency to deal with corruption, we bloody well need it now, when you see what's happened. We failed with the Mann Tribunal, we failed with the Moriarty Tribunal, because nobody paid any attention to it. It's gone under the radar. We now need an agency to deal with specifically politicians, everybody that's elected, whether you're elected as a councillor, a senator or a TD, that you can be examined continually and forcibly as to make sure that you're not breaking any rules. And I would be very disappointed but not surprised if the government do not support this, this motion here today.
Deputy Tom, you have the time remaining, Deputy, just over 2.5 minutes.
Okay, here, look. In 2014, the European Union published its first anti-corruption report, which examines issues of transparency, public procedure policies and bribing across 28 EU member states. According to the report, corruption-related risks due to close ties between politicians and industry continue to be a cause for concern in Ireland. The report further noted that the adoption of the Electoral Political Funding Act 2012 needed vast improvement. A major legal grey area regarding political donations relates to the amount of times corporations and individuals can donate. The current legislation tackles the amount donated in a single transaction rather than the overall amount one can donate. The report further found that legislation regarding election and referendum campaigns remain weak. Many of the Irish anti-corruption laws were overlapping and contradicting one another, leading to legal difficulties and loopholes. A large portion of Ireland's anti-corruption laws are still based on the United Kingdom's Prevention of Corruption Acts. Problems regarding outdated and conflicting legislation are affecting the capacity to efficiently prosecute and punish corruption. We do not have an independent, for instance, an urban planning regulator with the capacity and the powers to investigate systemic problems arising in local government. Indeed, the findings of the recommendation of the EU portray that although Ireland is tackling to a certain extent political corruption, it still remains a very large major problem. Look, back in the 1990s, we started off with the Beef Tribunal. That was a precedent for what followed it in a whole host of tribunals after that, whereby these tribunals found evidence of political corruption, but very few politicians were criminally convicted or charged. In response to the McCracken Tribunal, the Moriarty Tribunal was established in 1997. This found further exposed corrupt payments, donations and gifts to prominent Irish political figures by businesses and large corporations in order to win favouritism and influence. And the Mahon Tribunal was the most expensive and longest running in this country, and it shocked the Irish political system, highlighting the dysfunctional and corruption of political culture as a whole. And I fully support the very good logical motions that are and all the proposals that are included in this by the group here, the Social Democratic Group.